Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent on the emergency shelter crisis as people continue to arrive in Massachusetts for a chance at housing. The first report that came out in the middle of December showed the state had spent $205 million on the crisis. In the latest report that came out this week, it states that Massachusetts has spent $325 million. Governor Maura Healey placed a 7,500 family cap on who can be guaranteed housing in the state, which the Commonwealth reached back in the fall. Since then, the state has been relying on overflow shelters to accommodate families. Most recently, a shelter opened up in Roxbury, which can shelter up to 100 families. Western Massachusetts does not have any overflow sites and has been largely dependent on hotels and motels to house the homeless and migrant families. Representative Carlos Gonzalez believes that hotels and motels could be taking advantage of the situation by charging the state a higher than average rate for rooms.
I think it's a very challenging situation. We're doing the best we can during the circumstances. However, I think we can do a better job in communication with local authorities, as well as making sure that we are better stewards of the funding that's being utilized to house the migrant community by making some better decisions in contractual agreements and where we house them.
Western Massachusetts is housing approximately 800 families, with Springfield hosting the third most in the state at 290 families. It is estimated that this crisis will cost the state close to $1 billion this fiscal year. Working for you at the State House in Boston, Ellen Fleming.
And that's a troubling sign, given that black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
He says, as a former regional director for FEMA, he understands the challenge.
This place needs a lot more work for folks that are here. They can't keep them too long. They get past 100, 150. They're not going to have the space to move around to do the counseling that they need to do. But most important of all, when you have young girls and you have nursing mothers and people who need to be in a place where they can have privacy.
Many people in this community are not happy about this. In fact, protesters gathered outside with signs yesterday. They shouted through a bullhorn as state and city leaders stood before the cameras. The governor says this facility will not be used as a shelter past June. Dozens more migrants are expected to arrive this week.
And that's a troubling sign, given that black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
Families. The cots and strollers were shipped in today. It's just born out of necessity, and we just have to do what we have to do in this time. The plan is to move families here who have nowhere else to go. Many are currently camped out at Logan's Terminal E.
We should be sharing it. We're blessed to be able to do this.
Some residents told us they have no problem with the temporary overflow shelter, but Rodnell Collins says police must commit to safety and security for all. He points out neighboring Malcolm X Park already has a history of drug and gang activity.
And that's abated quite a bit, okay? But there are elements that are still there.
We were blindsided.
Community activist Lauren Thompson told us by phone that many families are now scrambling since the temporary shelter will abruptly close down recreational programs for seniors and young people.
Parents depend on some of these after-school activities because they're working.
It is a lot to ask to, again, a community that is dealing with a lot, that needs a lot of equity.
Boston City Councilor Tanya Fernandez Anderson acknowledges giving up the rec center is a big ask for Roxbury.
This is an important hub for us, but also these are human beings.
Now, the governor says she is working to find another location for community sports and activities.
And that's a troubling sign, given that black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
closing a community sports center for 4 months to house migrants. And locals there letting her know they are not happy about this decision.
More. Why do you think it's okay to take out resources from the citizens of Massachusetts?
I gotta go. You know, we're everywhere in the state. You know,
No, that's not an excuse. You serve us, not these illegals. Not these illegals.
You're not children. That's the problem. We need a housing bill passed.
No, you don't. You need to deport them. You need to deport them. Lame excuses.
Sean Nelson shot that video. Catherine Vitale is a lifelong resident in that town. Roxbury, Massachusetts is the scene, and they both join me now. Sean, point blank, where do these kids in this community go for the next 4 months? Kids, many of whom are vulnerable and need this center for recreation and, quite frankly, to stay off the streets.
They're being dispersed by the governor. She doesn't care. Remember, her priorities are these illegal immigrants. You want to house them, and by taking their Roxbury's resources and giving them to a bunch of illegals, like you said, criminals who came here illegally across our borders. And she has no mind what she's going to do with.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
And she has no mind what she's going to do with our people. She's taking resources from Roxbury and also from all across Massachusetts with people who are struggling now. Her responsibilities are to Massachusetts, not someone who hopped over the border.
Catherine, you heard in that video when asked a question, the governor said, oh, we need more housing. When it comes to the governor and the other officials that you have questioned on this, what do you make of the response or lack thereof that you're getting from them when it comes to, hey, we're taxpaying citizens and we're getting the shaft?
Well, it's simple. Boston is full. We can't handle all of these migrants coming in. Governor Haley and Mayor Michelle Wu are, they're putting a huge burden on the residents of Roxbury. Even less than a quarter mile down the road, there's an open air drug market. These people are already struggling in this neighborhood, and now they're having one of their assets taken away from them. It's not fair to them.
Sean, do you scratch your head and ask yourself, why don't these two, Wu and Healy, just tell Joe Biden, their Democrat leader, to just shut the border and enforce the law at the border? Then none of this would be necessary. Do you ask yourself that?
I know exactly why. They're in contact with Joe Biden's White House, and they're going along with his agenda with basically replacing us residents as their new voters and their cheap workforce labor. Again, Boston is full. They don't care about us. They only care about their agenda and their political careers at our expense.
Sean, the state says the migrants will be out by May. Do you trust that?
No, I don't. The last time they said something was going to last so long, it lasted 3 years when we had the COVID lockdowns. 3 months for the curve, and then 3 months turned into the 3 years, and we still dealing with COVID.
Sean, when you look at here in New York City, when the migrants have left a place where they have been housed, that place has been left in absolute disrepair. The state says after the 4-month period is up that you can trust them to have it all cleaned up and all set and ready for the kids and seniors, I should add, once again. Do you trust that it's going to be cleaned up when the migrants leave?
No, I do not. I know for a fact that in the state of Massachusetts and Boston, the government takes their time doing anything. And when they tell us, oh, it's going to take 2 weeks for us to finish something up, it takes a year. People have been complaining. When both me and Catherine were ran for city council at large candidates, we've heard so many complaints from the citizens talking about, well, you have things that are just impaired, and they've been calling City Hall multiple times, and their calls are being ignored.
Catherine,
I'm not surprised when this occurred.
Catherine, why do these Democrat leaders seem so willing to subjugate the interests of the tax-paying American citizens in favor of those literally invading our country? Final word to you, Catherine.
That's a great question. We already have over 7,500 immigrant families living in Boston. We are completely depleting all of our resources, and it's not fair to American-born citizens who are already struggling with homelessness that don't have enough resources for ourselves. We can't continue to help these people.
Amen. When you think of the veterans that are homeless, why aren't we paying attention to them? Why are we subjugating their interests for the illegals as well? Sean and Catherine, keep up the fight.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
Closing a community sports center for 4 months to house migrants, and locals there letting her know they are not happy about this decision.
More. Why do you think it's okay to take out resources from the citizens of Massachusetts?
I gotta go. You know, we're everywhere in the state. You know,
No, that's not an excuse. You serve us, not these illegals. Not these illegals.
You're not children. That's the problem. We need a housing bill passed.
No, you don't. You need to deport them. You need to deport them. Lame excuses.
Sean Nelson shot that video. Catherine Vitale's a lifelong resident in that town. Roxbury, Massachusetts is the scene, and they both join me now. Sean, point blank, where do these kids in this community go for the next 4 months? Kids, many of whom are vulnerable and need this center for recreation and, quite frankly, to stay off the streets.
They're being dispersed by the governor. She doesn't care. Remember, her priorities are these illegal immigrants. You want to house them, and by taking their Roxbury's resources and giving them to a bunch of illegals, like you said, criminals who came here illegally across our borders. And she has no mind what she's going to do with.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
Neighborhood that's called Roxbury. Officials there plan to spend about $500,000 outfitting that facility for housing. A lot of locals whose kids rely on the center for sports and after-school activities are now outraged. The youth and community programs housed in that facility are now left scrambling to find new ones. Joining us now is Domingos DeRosa, Boston resident, also organizer of the Boston Bengal's Youth Athletic Organization. Domingos, thanks for being with us. Talk to me, how do you feel about everything that's taking place?
Well, you know, it's disheartening when you pin one community versus the next. Folks here are looking to help and support folks who are coming in to the community. But at the same time, we're also looking for the support we've been asking for decades.
Well, to that point, how do you feel about specifically the fact that the government has now come up with enough money to transform this facility when, as I understand, residents there have been asking for funding for the rec center for a long time?
Well, it shows you the urgency that they take when it comes to matters here in Boston. Depending on what the conditions are, you know, they're quick to move money around and make things happen. Again, you know, this side here, folks have been asking for an upgrade for the last 10 to 15 years. And overnight, you know, we're finding funding to rehabilitate the building to fit the state's needs.
One resident in your neighborhood, a guy named Rodney Singleton, asked the governor why she had singled this facility out, citing it as a predominantly black neighborhood to requisition and not somewhere else that's more affluent, maybe has more resources allotted to it already. Has the community received any kind of response to that question?
No, not a concrete answer. But again, you know, myself and others who have been having this discussion over years of neglect of Roxbury, we all know it goes back to voting percentages here in this district. They seem to, you know, use Roxbury and certain parts of Boston where black and brown predominantly people live as areas that they, you know, make changes without asking for the community's approval.
Take a listen to Boston's mayor talking about the folks, the 125 families roughly, who are going to be moved into the rec center.
Their stories are the same as ours. People who just want to try to give their kids a chance and a better life. And we are a little bit stuck in a system where the federal machinery needs a lot of fixing.
How do you feel about those comments?
Passing the buck. You know, this is passing the buck. Boston itself does not have the infrastructure as people might project. Here, you know, we have families who are always displaced because of natural disasters, fires, and things of that nature, emergencies. And, you know, we place them in the Red Cross's hands. And as you know, that's, you know, 1 or 2 days in a hotel. But once that voucher is expired, what do we do next? And we don't have that system here in Boston for residents. So, you know, we don't want to see the buck passed. We want folks to actually take accountability and say, hey, you know, this is a bigger picture, which it is. But at the same time, those same resources that we're looking to provide for others don't exist for Bostonians themselves.
Well, Domingos, we got to leave it there, but like to stay in touch with you on this, see how things shake out moving forward and what the experience is like for you and all your neighbors there.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
A lot going on in Boston. It's crazy out here, Brian. So after sleeping on the floor of Boston Logan International Airport, the migrants are on the move, taking over this recreation center in Roxbury behind me. The complex is a staple of the community for kids to play and seniors to exercise at low cost. Our next guest is not happy with the mayor as she's flooded with the calls from constituents, but she says that she's powerless, and it's up to the state. Join us now is the Democrat Boston City Council at large, Erin Murphy. But first, we're going to go to Effie. Keisha, you know, you were just on the street, and I saw your outrage. Why are you outraged?
Because this place was, like you said, it's free. It was a place for our children. Our children. I have 4 children, and it's sad. You know, I have 4 boys, you know, and we really don't have nothing in the community that's free for us. Don't get me wrong, it's great that they want to help the immigrants, but what about the Americans that are already here? What about the people that are already here that don't have homes, that don't have jobs, that are sleeping on the street already? These people came from the airport here, probably on boats, probably on buses, and probably all for free. Now they're getting stipends, they're getting what else? I need money for me and my kids, and I was born here. Like, you know, I know life is a struggle in itself, but this is not the answer to help them. Now it's going to destroy our community more and mess our children up more. Like, this is sad. I know a lot of people don't even know about this. I came here last night with my aunt, saw a lot of stadies, a lot of police, and this paper wasn't there yet. They just did this probably 2, 3 in the morning when they brung them here. When everybody's asleep, that's when they brung them here probably. On buses, I saw New York plates. I saw Washington, D.C. plates. So they have that much money to come from Washington, D.C. to do this, to do that. Why are they not helping the people here first?
Yes, ma'am.
We need help.
Let's talk to one of the counselors.
Yes.
Erin, Ms. Murphy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
When you hear the passion right here from...
That's what I hear in my office all the time. And it is a balance. Like I was telling you earlier, the state owns this building, so the governor has to make a decision on where to put the overflow migrants. But at the same time, the community needs to make sure that that we keep their services in place.
Why would they declare Boston as a sanctuary city?
I mean, I think a lot of cities across this country are, once they declare themselves a sanctuary city, I'm not sure if they knew the amount of support we were going to need to give.
Was that, I know you're a Democrat, but do you think declaring cities as sanctuaries was a mistake in retrospect?
Looking back, if our communities end up losing the services they need to live full lives, I think we may be questioning that. We do have to find a balance to make sure that those migrant families have a safe place to go. But at the same time, my concern, I'm an elected official here. I represent the whole city, and I'm the chair of public health in the last 2 years in homelessness. And I've centered my advocacy and policy on making sure that every resident has the resources they need. And I'm hearing that seniors and kids, like Effie was just telling us, that her own family, right, might be disrupted. So I'm making sure that the city is stepping up and connecting with all the departments so that these displaced, residents who use this every day.
Let's bring Keisha back in here. Keisha, you hear that from your counselor. What do you want done right now?
You know, like she said, we want to help them, but at the same time, what about us that need help here? What about, I'm a mother and I have 4 children. They need help. They need somewhere to go. They need something to do.
What type of activities used to be in this building?
Skating ring, exercising, like a place where you can just go chill and stay out of trouble. Now we have to find other places.
What's going to be the consequence of this being changed and just to the migrants? And where are those kids going to go right now?
Probably to the streets. To the streets, where most of them are already at. Like when we look for help, it seems like the state and the governor and them people, they push us away. They want to turn our children to animals. They want our children to be bad and F up. We want better for our community.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
Another one of our Fox News polls this week. They are in a dead heat there, 47-47. Rich, it's a state that President Biden did win last time around.
Yep.
It's neck and neck.
Another state's going to be very close. But this national polling is really extraordinary because you look back at 2020, Trump didn't lead in any polls. I think that maybe there was one where he was ahead of Biden in 2020. Every other one he was trailing. Against Hillary Clinton in 2016, same story, at least the last couple months before the election. So this is the strongest that Donald Trump has polled ever in his national political career. And it's not because he's hugely personally popular. He's not. It's because the enfeebled state of Joe Biden, who is the weakest incumbent president running for re-election since George H.W. Bush or Jimmy Carter.
Well, we've got conflicting national polls. When you go head-to-head, CNN had one out this week that says 49% of registered voters say they would back Trump if the election between the two were held today. 45% for Biden, 5% say they'd vote for someone else. Then you go over to Quinnipiac. I mean, these are both very well-respected polling operations. They say Biden holds a lead over Trump 50-44 among registered voters in that hypothetical election matchup.
Yes, this is going to be a close election. And polls this far out aren't really predictive of what will happen. I do think they should be concerning to the Biden team in some of these states. But look, Donald Trump has a ceiling, a very hard ceiling to voters, and he's probably there because Joe Biden right now is getting all the downsides of incumbency and none of the positives, right? Donald Trump can just run around and say whatever he wants, and Joe Biden's governing, dealing with a war in the Middle East, dealing with an economy. I mean, Olivia's right, they're running on this economy. It is back in many ways better than pre-pandemic. Wages are outpacing inflation. Inflation is down. They feel very good about this. People are starting to feel this. So I think the Biden team has work to do. This is a close election. The country is very divided.
You've seen the White House try to go around the traditional modes of communication to voters, right? They're going more towards just niche outlets, not some of the traditional just venues that you've seen presidents take advantage of in the past. And it's maybe probably a questionable strategy, just given that the White House is struggling to really message with voters and connect with some of its key constituents. We saw South Carolina, for example, yesterday, the outreach toward black voters. And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
Yeah, we have all kinds of polls this week. Some of them show real trouble for the White House for the president's reelection. Our Fox News poll in Georgia, if the choice was voting for today, it gives President Trump an 8-point lead in a very important swing state there, Olivia.
Yeah, and it's, I think, very devastating. We've been seeing swing state polls coming in for months now, and they should be raising alarm because in some of the ones that Donald Trump won, I think there's 7 swing states that we've really been tracking, and now Biden is behind in 6 of them. But I think that they're also optimistic that they will be able to sell their economic message, which President Biden just had a very good jobs report. And the fear of recession is going down. Job wages are, beating inflation for the first time after bad inflation, but it still hasn't impacted his numbers. So I think that he's hoping in those states he's going to be able to sell those voters. And Donald Trump is also recalibrating his message, trying to claim that this is an economy that is responding to him being the future president, which, I think some of his advisors are saying, we don't think that's the best act, but
Taking credit ahead of time.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's look to Wisconsin.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
So they could house migrants there. Here is one protester complaining, and I want to see if this strikes a nerve with you. Watch.
We've seen this all across Massachusetts and the country where these illegal immigrants are coming in here, taking all our resources, and people who have been fighting for their own piece of the pie are being left out in the cold.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying, listen, we're paying our taxes, we're doing it, we are struggling, we're trying to work our jobs, and we can barely afford to live here, and they're giving these migrants our stuff. What do you think?
Well, I think that it's the same thing that we saw here in Chicago, and what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to stand up.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
They're going to have to stand up, and they're going to have to fight against the administration. They're going to have to be vocal the way I've been vocal, and you're going to have to stand up against the mayor of that city, against the governor of that state, and against President Biden. I know that there's a lot going on in the country right now, and right now I know that Biden has his hands full, but there is a crisis at the border, and it needs to be dealt with. And I don't think that he can continue to pretend like that's not an issue across this country. And as I have said many times now, if the Biden administration is not going to listen to the people of this country, then we're certainly not going to be supporting the Biden administration in this upcoming election. And I want to say to those people who are going through the same things that we've gone through here in Chicago, that if the administration continues to not listen to you, continue to not want to value your voices, then we have to take our votes elsewhere. Listen, it is time out for the going along to get along. We cannot continue to be pushed aside. We cannot continue to allow the resources, not just of these particular sanctuary cities, but of the states and in this country, to be given away to other people while we stand idly by in need of things.
Yeah, it's a very fair assessment. I wonder, because the last time you were on this show, Kata, you were furious at the way that the Chicago politicians and the national politicians were handling things in your area. Since you spoke up, has anything changed?
Nothing has changed, unfortunately. But as I said before, I'm not looking for the Democratic Party to change, so that means that I have to change. That means that inner city voters, that means that voters in sanctuary cities, we're going to have to be the ones to change. As you see here, I am wearing red, representing red, because this is going to be the new face of a lot of Chicagoans. And it's going to have to be the face of a lot of people who were formerly Democrats.
Yeah, I am wearing red as well. Kata Trust, we are for a different reason, but I appreciate your color support, and I certainly appreciate the fact that you come on the show. We look forward to getting an update from you in the weeks ahead. Kata Trust,
thank you so much for having me.
And that's a troubling sign, given that the black voters are the bedrock of the party. It kind of shows that, hey, you need to figure out how to communicate to some of these key constituencies as you start to barrel toward the November general election.
He says, as a former regional director for FEMA, he understands the challenge.
This place needs a lot more work for folks that are here. They can't keep them too long. They get past 100, 150. They're not going to have the space to move around, to do the counseling that they need to do. But most important of all, when you have young girls and you have nursing mothers and people who need to be in a place where they can have privacy.
Many people in this community are not happy about this. In fact, protesters gathered outside with signs yesterday. They shouted through a bullhorn as state and city leaders stood before the cameras. The governor says this facility will not be used as a shelter past June. Dozens more migrants are expected to arrive this week.
And we close on that. Boy.